Our house has this wonderful thing that if we've set the rest of the house kind of high, the corners are very, very, very not warm. And I'm in one of those corners, and it feels really nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
I'm in the hottest room in the house because of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 computers running right now.
That'll do that. Free heat for you.
Well, it's not free. But
It's a
yeah.
byproduct, Jake. It's a byproduct.
It's not my heater doing it,
They
so
were
it's
already
free in that way.
paid for. They're already going to be running.
Fine.
Yeah.
I'm not talking anymore.
Get
Okay,
out.
bye.
Get out of here.
Welcome to We Might Be Nerds, a podcast about everything from entertainment and technology to science and history. I'm your host, Dylan Critchfield. Joining me today is Kyle Montgomery, finally back. How's it going?
Going pretty good. I'm excited to be back.
I know you've been busy, you've been working very hard, so no hard feelings. It's good to have you back. But also joining us today is Jacob Montgomery, back from our episode on prosumerism. Welcome, Jake.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
And from our Halloween little factoid special, joining us again is my lovely wife, Sarah Critchfield. Welcome, hon.
Hi.
So today, as we've teased a couple times now, we are talking about the value of video games. Now, I do want to preface this discussion. All four of us here grew up in kind of the age of home video game systems. So there may be an apparent bias. I could not blame you for thinking that. However, we're going into this discussion with the mindset of, yes, video gaming has value, but we're not going to gloss over the problems. There are very real and present problems, especially in the modern gaming landscape, that we do want to talk about and address because, you know, it's not all rainbows and sunshine at all. I think we can agree on that. There are
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
yeah, we got some issues to talk about, but beyond that, I think let's just go in and start with let's start by like addressing the fact that video gaming has always kind of had a stigma around it. Video games started in the coin-op business, the coin-op arcade. If you grew up in the 70s and 80s, you've almost certainly been to an arcade of some sort. But video games were born out of the pinball scene, which had a lot of negative connotations to it because pinball was actually viewed as and treated as gambling in a lot of states and jurisdictions and was actually outlawed for a long time up until the 60s. And video games, especially arcade machines, fell under those laws. The book, The Ultimate History of Video Games, goes into a lot of details regarding that bit of the history. But it became destigmatized over time as far as being associated with gambling. But in our time growing up, there's always been a stigma associated with it in one form or another, whether it's blaming violent acts on video games, saying, oh, they were playing those video games, it made them think that was okay. We've always dealt with that stigma growing up.
Oh,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, you hear it all the time.
And I'm sure like all of us have had some sort of interaction with a person who was like, video games, there's nothing redeeming about them. There's no value. People who play video games are invariably lazy or incapable or inept in some way. I know I've had a few. I've sat near a few conversations of that ilk. I'm not sure if any of you guys have had any of that either.
Why are
Not-
you wasting your time and stuff like that when you could be
Yeah.
doing something productive?
Personally, not extreme to that end, but I have had conversations that have trended towards that side. Now, in your experience, do you feel that has been something that is age related, as in a disconnect between generations, possibly?
I definitely see. The people who I've heard speak in that manner were definitely of a different time, I'll say. Definitely much older than myself or any of us. We average about 30 here if you like average our ages. But I think a lot of the perception from older folks comes from just like a lack of understanding, that generational disconnect, like kind of the way I think a few of us don't understand things like TikTok or Snapchat, or just refuse
I'm
to
out of
engage in
touch.
those mediums. But like, I do think that has something to do with it. But also, there's always been a media stigmatism as well until like the past decade or so. A lot more research has come out and shown some positive aspects. So before we dive into any of that, uh, off the top of your head, what is one benefit of gaming that you have experienced, or a skill that you have developed that you would not have otherwise had you not been involved with the video game landscape, or that hobby rather?
Overcoming social anxiety.
I can see that one definitely if you played any MMOs.
I guess just an increased ability to deal with kind of spatial reasoning. Like I played a lot of Tetris and columns with you guys, and yeah, I certainly know how to pack a car or a trunk or something like that.
Good skill to have.
Yeah, it's a great skill.
Important life skills.
It's very useful in just storing stuff in a closet or an attic.
like the one that comes to mind for me, from this is going to date me quite a bit, is playing games like Halo 1 on dial-up before voice chat was very popular or accessible for someone like me who was on dial-up. Having to type to communicate in team games that were very fast-paced. That's actually where I learned to type quickly and accurately. That is, like, if I had to pick one skill I picked up that I would not have picked up otherwise, I definitely think it would be my speed with typing. Straight up.
Same.
Yeah.
I think
I think like
a little young for that one.
yeah.
What were you saying, Jake?
I was gonna say like the skill for me would probably be teamwork, because I know like for myself, like I mean I did play like a lot of single player games, but like especially getting older and as like co-op games got like increasingly more popular and like easier to do online. Um yeah, I think I've learned a lot about working with other people and not like just trying to lead the team, because there's like so many games now, like if you just try to do everything by yourself, you're gonna get destroyed. And that kind of like translates to real life. If you're like in a job that requires you to work with the team, if you just try to take everything on your shoulders, it's not as good as if everybody splits the load.
Yeah, like if you're a lone wolf in an online game, especially one of a competitive nature, you're almost always going to get obliterated. And
Right.
similarly, that does translate into real life, especially if you're working in a team environment. If you try to do everything on your own, there can often be negative consequences to that. Not just in terms of individual performance, but in terms of lack of communications, things not coming
Right.
across, things getting missed. Definitely see that. These are just things that we've kind of picked up through our experience. And another benefit that we've seen and has been proven through studies done in the past decade is the social impact. Especially we live in the COVID times. If you're listening to this far, post coronavirus, we're living in that time right now. And a lot of us have been in a fairly harsh state of quarantine or lockdown due to living with an immunocompromised family member. But so a lot of us are limited to online interactions for like human contact outside the home. The four of us play games fairly regularly together as just kind of a social bonding thing, not dissimilar to like how you would normally get together and like play board games with someone. I feel like that's a very pretty accurate analog for what we do. Would you say that's accurate?
Oh, for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah, and it's almost like an excuse to talk. Like instead of like, oh, let's just get online and talk like we're doing right now, which is fun. But like we're gonna play this game, but from that, it's just talking to each
We're
other
kind
and
of playing the game in the background, but we are talking
right. Yes.
more so than just doing the game.
At this point, it's the
Right.
best excuse we have.
But like it's for me, like it's no different than if we were all sitting in front of a TV playing a game in that environment, or sitting around a table and having a discussion over a board game. That's very much kind of the vibe in this group, at least. I understand that's like I've been a part of a lot of online gaming groups in my life, and that's always kind of the general vibe is. The game is there, yes, but the social interaction is the primary. It breeds human contact, and in the case of MMOs, massively multiplayer online RPGs, uh, that was a good way for me, someone who is rather reclusive and being very introverted. Like, if you're an introvert, you don't tend to seek social contact. I have a lot of social anxiety, so I didn't get out as much as other people, but like I still had plenty of social interaction and learned a lot about social interaction through things like MMOs. And Sarah, I know this is something you feel particularly strongly about. I'm just gonna let you do your rant.
I'll do my rant. Yes. My gaming history, I had a few console games, but mostly once I found MMOs, that was my niche. And honestly, for just about every skill, you could probably find an MMO for that. There's so many different topics and settings that are offered through MMOs, so they do appeal to just about anyone.
Right.
As far as the social aspects of MMOs, I myself very socially anxious even now, but nowhere like I used to be before MMOs fell on my lap. Um, the game's there, but on the other side of the other avatars on the screen, those are real people. And you learn real scenarios in a fictional world. So, yeah, the situation may be a little odd that you're arguing over some loot, but it would be the same as you're at the store and there's only so many of a thing and you had to figure out the solution of who goes home with the thing. Uh,
Like a lot of like guild or like clan management in MMOs comes down to you have to define an organizational structure. You have to split up the roles and the workload, and you have to make sure that everybody in the guild or clan or group, as I'll just refer to it now, is treated fairly, and that there are rules in place to make sure everybody thrives. I spent a lot of time playing World of Warcraft when I was younger. I was an officer in many a guild, and you have to through interacting with people, you learn their strengths and what they're good at, and you can put those people into those roles. And it can teach a lot about team building and splitting up duties if done right. I can't say that's going to be everybody's experience, especially now. My experience was before uh, World of Warcraft was what server you were on didn't matter anymore. Back in the day, the social aspect was a lot more driven home because when you were a part of a server, you were known. You only had a couple thousand players on those servers, and if you were a bad actor, if you ran a group and stole the loot, people would be on the forums talking about it. You would be blacklisted. You had social responsibility to your server, and if some people I know got basically ousted and forced to move servers because frankly, they were just not great people and nobody wanted to deal with them anymore. They couldn't find a place in a guild because nobody wanted to play with them. People were held accountable for their actions. Unfortunately, WoW implemented cross-server stuff where you could start doing certain activities outside the scope of your server, and that really lessened the social responsibility aspect. But I feel like games that have a small enough footprint still that holds true. You have a community, people become known, and you know people learn accountability, especially like younger people who are put in those environments. They have to interact with people and treat them as if they're still there face to face because the fact of the matter is their name's going to be known.
Yeah, you had a reputation that followed you.
Yeah, straight up. Like, just like if you live in a town, like in a high school kids get a reputation one way or another, whether they like it or not. You know that, and same thing with people in their workplace. Like, I'm gonna know if Joe Schmo down the hall is a terrible customer for me to interact with, and that I want to avoid him. Nobody wants to help him out because he's always crabby to people. You know, it can help people kind of pre-adjust to those social situations that they wouldn't have exposure to otherwise. And we there's been a lot of research in the past 10 years that shows a couple of actual tangible benefits in a number of ways.
Sure, I might have had personal friendships, but even in the most basic form of uh, uh, socializing while gaming and belonging to a guild or a clan, it just afforded some very unique friendships, things that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Who knew I would have had friends from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast? That wouldn't have really been possible just playing video games with the people you know, or from your school, just at someone's house. It just wouldn't have been possible. So having a platform to really uh, to afford that is was something very special to me, especially at a very impressionable age, 13, 14, 15. It felt like the greatest thing. I really value it.
Yeah, and getting cultural exposure outside of your sort of physical bubble, if you will, I think is definitely beneficial. Being part of a community that is bigger than your physical space and having different perspectives, I think is definitely a value that online gaming has brought to the forefront in the past 20 years or so. Um, I my Dr. Mark, who was on the podcast last week talking about VR, I met him through playing Halo, and we've been great friends for 16 years now. I never would have met that dude or known anything about the different perspectives of life that he has had I not engaged with video games as a medium, specifically online. And the online social benefits are numerous, but it's not to say that's not without downside. There are definitely toxic communities and groups of people that you want to avoid. That the internet gives a voice to everybody, and it can amplify a small subset of very toxic voices in a lot of way, and that's true of some games and their communities.
And the anonymity of being online, it gives people the sense of power that they can do whatever they want, say whatever they want, and it's not going to affect the person on the other end, but it always does. And going back to the accountability, that's something that accountability needs to be there.
That's just an internet in general problem though. Like, it's very easy through text especially to forget that there's a human on the other side. That's a phenomenon that's been observed I know a number of times and has been addressed in public forums a few times. Reasons you don't see things get nearly as toxic in some social media things is because like you don't have that layer of anonymity. In some case, I feel like it's necessary to be able to retain anonymity just to like have a voice. But when you abuse that power, that's when it becomes problematic, and that definitely extends to gaming. I feel like a lot of it was kind of bred there in certain communities. Like
Yeah.
I'm loath to call any one thing out, but like League of Legends, in particular, is one of the most toxic communities I've ever engaged with in gaming, and it's something I distance myself from now because I have no desire to engage in being called a lot of things that I will not repeat on this show because I misclicked something or I didn't perform as well as some other people thought I should. That's breeding that toxic environment and being a part of that is something you choose to engage in, and I chose not to engage in it because of that community. But some people stick in it, and if they do stick in it because they love the game but they don't like the people, I mean that's shown to have issues on uh, shown to have impacts on people's mental health. You know, if you're constantly
Yeah.
engaged in a toxic environment, it will affect you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just in that case basic psychology.
Yeah, straight up. Speaking of psychology, there I was doing some research because like obviously we see the benefits of the medium having been engaged with it as long as we have. Some of us basically our whole lives from very young, but a lot of research in the past 10 years specifically has shown a number of actual measurable benefits, specifically in younger children, but also in adults. Um, just one of the general evidences found. This is from the National Library of Medicine. There was a study done of a bunch of puzzle games and how that affects a person's cognitive ability, and the findings gave evidence that video games. I'm just going to quote the conclusion here because I don't think I could paraphrase this and do it justice. Overall, findings give evidences of benefits of video games training on cognitive and emotional skills in relation to the healthy adult population, especially on young adults. Efficacy has been demonstrated not only for non commercial video games or commercial brain training programs, but for commercial video games as well. Commercial video games referring to stuff like you would see on an Xbox or a PlayStation or your Nintendo Switch or Wii. Um, I remember reading a study a few like in my college days that playing puzzle games in the morning would kind of kickstart your brain. Like, you eat breakfast to give your body fuel, but it suggested that doing puzzles like Sudoku or playing a puzzle game like Tetris increased the level of brain function and had a positive impact on the ability to retain information. So, like, straight up, I would get to the cafeteria at the college, play Tetris for half an hour before I went to class every day, just because, and it definitely felt like I retained more after I started that habit. There have been some other benefits revealed as well. Kyle, one that you and I were talking about before we started the show with emotional benefits in children and anger management.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel in a lot of ways. Oh, I apologize. A child is up and currently they're getting drinks in the kitchen. So give me just a second for that to clear. I apologize.
All good.
But yeah, like it seemed, yeah, like from that article you sent me that was from Peter Gray
No.
about, the benefits of playing video games. He was talking about like how kids, like, they'll sometimes try to get scared or try to get angry because it's just like the brain try to learn how to deal with like those types of situations.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like video games, like from that study or from like the research people have done, were like a good way to like test that out. Like, you're playing a game and you can't figure something out at first and you would get frustrated, and then you learn how to get over being frustrated. And, that helps like with your development is basically what with that part of it I saw for kids.
Yeah, like psychologically, kids learn through play. That's like
Right.
a lot of what play is for kids is basically simulation training. It's a gross oversimplification, but it's teaching the brain how to handle certain scenarios.
Yep. From what I had also seen as well, they had conducted focus groups trying to get children's opinions on what they really liked about video games. And generally, when they were talking about any core attributes, it would be about the freedom that they could experience, their own having their own personal self direction, their own control over it, and generally feeling a sense of competence while playing these games. And that's something that is not only set up to really deal with diffusing anger or learning how to deal with it, but just it's that, and it's therapeutic in nature.
Yeah, being able to force an emotion out of your body through working it out in some way. It's been proven to be beneficial. Like people go to the gym to punch a bag to get out some aggression, or you might scream into a pillow because you're upset. Games can act as an outlet in that way, as these studies have shown. And I will have links to not only the Psychology Today article, but the source papers in the show notes. But like, there's also like benefits in terms of like teaching kids how to persevere and like act upon long-term goals. Um, like from personal experience, like as far as observing this in children, we've got a couple of kids who play games. Our youngest, Sarah and I's youngest, has been playing a lot of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is an extremely large game with a lot to do in it. And she's gotten very good about setting her own goals and then going and accomplishing them through perseverance. She's constantly kept at it, and she's very proud of her ability to keep trying and eventually succeed.
Helps to be strategic as well, in a way that
Yes, to
sometimes you
problem
wouldn't
solve.
you wouldn't have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
Having that construct there for you, that's I think it's just so cool to have something there that doesn't necessarily require risks, or
Yeah.
like different types of consequences that would come from that. It would be within the game and not actually in real life. So even though the stakes are virtually high, you could still learn. You can still get the real sense of a strategy.
Having a virtual space to learn in is a proven benefit. Like Dr. Mark and I talked about last week, a lot of companies are trying to use cross reality solutions as part of their training regimen to put people into situations that would otherwise be life threatening, but are
Or too
not so,
expensive.
or too expensive to do
Right, yeah.
outside of the context of a cross reality, mixed reality setup. Um, and I think a lot of video games for kids at least is a lot of basically just scenario training and learning how to deal with those different things. Obviously, moderation in all things. Like, I'm not saying put your kid in front of a screen for 10 hours a day. That's obviously unhealthy. Everything needs to be moderated. But, we've got these studies now that show these benefits. And I actually wanted to hop back onto the emotional benefits a little bit. And kind of pitfalls that I didn't realize I was falling into, but makes sense in retrospectively. You'll like, I know I've seen our kids getting worked up a couple times because of something they're experiencing in the video game, and we've all gotten this where we've gotten very, very frustrated at something in a game. And as a parent, your default instinct is to say, all right, well, we need to stop playing the game now. But what the studies have found is, like, during these moments of intense excitement and emotion, including the negative emotions, it is, we worry it's not good for the kid. But the research supporting the emotion regulation theory indicates a major purpose of that play is to provide practice at dealing with that stuff. So, like, that's frankly probably going to change the perspective in, like, how I manage, like, if the kids are getting upset at each other in a game of Smash or getting upset at a situation in a game. Let them process that a bit more.
It's a good exercise in conflict resolution in
Right.
our kids' case, and then overcoming obstacles.
And also personal processing of emotions and learning to deal with adversity. Because adversity doesn't just come from people, it comes from just being challenged and learning to deal with being challenged. I don't think I'd be as nearly as hard-headed as I am today. I've gotten crap for this many times, but, like, I will frequently keep retrying something to a fault because, growing up, we in the age of gaming that, like, we grew up in, most of the games we played, You died 3 or 4 X amount of times, you had to start over from the beginning. And that kind of perseverance is something that is so deeply ingrained in me that it can, I'll admit, at times can become problematic, but you learn through failing is something that is kind of embedded into me now.
That's the
And
old arcade style of game. We don't see that a lot anymore,
yeah,
but yeah, that was the nature of arcade style
Oh
games.
yeah.
Growing up playing Sonic the Hedgehog, or if you did Super Mario or anything like that, where you had just a limited set of lives, yeah, it can be really frustrating if you die 3 times and have to do the whole thing all over again. I don't think I had the patience that you did, Dylan.
well, the ADD helped a lot with the hyper focusing.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I got the
Yeah.
other end of that.
I think yeah, that was like interesting that part I read because if you think about it, like you get mad at a game and then there's not just like one thing you can do about it. You could like you can just try it again, the same way, but maybe like you learned like your mistake, or you could like take a different tactic. Like I did this, that didn't work, so now I'm gonna try B this time, and okay, that helped, that did a little better. Or like even like C, like I know there's some games where I'm like, okay, I'm too mad at this. I have to set this down, walk away, come back to it. And there's a lot of things like in life like that
Yeah.
where like you just step away from it and then, you could think about it for a couple seconds, come back to it, and then, you just get through it because you're, just
Because you're
learned
level headed.
right, level headed, yeah.
And like
Yeah.
having that ability to walk away and process something and then have something come to mind and then you come back and try and it works, that's something that I experience a lot in my work life. And I
Right, yeah,
developed that
exactly.
habit through playing games, having them be very difficult, and then analyzing kind of what I was looking at from a separated perspective, and then coming back to it. That's a very helpful skill to have. I
Right.
think Dark Souls was the first. Like I talk about perseverance, but like Dark Souls, I kept getting mad at, but I kept trying at it. It was the first game where I had to stop just brute forcing my way through it, and Dark Souls is a game that is modeled upon everything in the game has to play by the same rules. And that was something that took me a while to grasp. But once I grasped that, the enemies and the player character all have to abide by the same rules. It helped me develop a skill to be self critical that, frankly, up until that point, I lacked. And being able to look and say, I did this wrong. I need to take this from another angle. That is a critical skill. And that was what 7 8 years ago that I started playing that, and it helped me a lot with self criticality and looking at myself in a self critical way, which up until that point I was frankly not great at.
Yeah.
I
And
see
plus,
Sarah
yeah, there's like
nodding.
self-critical and like patience because yeah, that game, if anything, rewards you being patient and taking your time instead of just
Thinking
bull
it
rushing
through
into
before you
everything.
do.
Right. And not just assuming, oh, I did this once before, so I can do it again. And I don't really have to think about it. No, you still have to, be patient every time.
Yeah, but like there are a subset of games that don't engage the player in that way. I know I sent you guys a link a while back to this, because like gaming is so pervasive today. You've got it on smartphones. You see places advertise video gaming in the sense of gambling, where it's just like video slot machines and a gas station or some crap like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
so it's almost full circle from the pinball machines. Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
the cell phones
Ooh,
specifically,
shining.
the smart devices, the tablets, and the phones, they are a breeding ground for shovelware and games that, rather than providing value in the context of a rewarding story, like a lot of single player games have a very deeply involved narrative that honestly can be a lot more gripping than any movie. Like, I think that's
It's
something
like an interactive movie.
yeah, that's something I meant to talk
Yeah,
about
because you're not just
earlier.
like a passive viewer. Yeah, you're like an active participant in it. Yeah.
Like a lot of those times where I was talking to someone who was like just saying there's nothing of value, those are the same people who will sit in front of a TV and watch the same crap get shoveled to them over and over again, the same shows over and over again that they've seen 1,000 times. You're not
Right.
doing anything other than sitting and absorbing. At least with a video game, you are engaging with something, and your neurons are actually firing because you're thinking about what you're doing on some level. And I'd argue a lot of games narratively, especially now with the technology we have and the depth that we can go to, are a lot more narratively rewarding than any movie I've ever seen. Because you can get so invested because, in a sense, you are putting yourself in there by controlling the actions of whatever main character may be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the technology now, you can explore the narrative so much deeper than you used to be. You had a linear, straightforward storyline. Now you have options that have consequences that can lead you in so many different ways. And it's so much more rewarding.
Yeah, and we saw that I think first with like the Mass Effect games, and then games like Skyrim. But like it's gotten a lot deeper now. Uh, like especially with games like Horizon Zero Dawn, I think is one of the
Yeah.
ones I haven't fully completed it yet. Full disclaimer,
I
but
haven't
like
played it at all, but
it,
yeah.
it has these branching choices that it's kind of a standard thing now that if you have choice in the narrative, it's going to affect something down the line. You're going to have a flashback, and I think that's powerful to have player agency pay off in the narrative. It's much more involved than watching a film or a show could ever be. The only thing I think goes deeper on narrative involvement and payoff is something like a tabletop RPG, which is well outside the scope of this discussion.
Yeah. But yeah, I think like it's kind of twofold. It's like it helps, you feel like you have agency in the game. Also, obviously, it helps with replayability because you can just go back and play the game a completely different way and get a different experience out of it.
Yeah, and get a
Yes.
different perspective. Like, oh, I'm gonna join this group this time and see what their thing's all about. The perfect example being the Stormcloaks and the Imperials in Skyrim,
Right.
for
Yeah.
a now rather dated example. But
Yeah, and then I think it also like, if you were playing a game at the same time as somebody, especially games now where they can be up to, like 100 hours or more,
yeah,
you could like be talking about like, well, I did this in the game, this happened, it just kind of facilitates discussion, outside of when you're playing it itself. So
You get different perspectives because back to the Imperials and the Stormcloaks, these are two sides of the same conflict, but there's different reasons behind it. And that's the same with real people and real situations is you need to hear the whole story.
and you get that full story in a way that cutaways in a show or movie never can accomplish to that degree. And again, that's valuable. But again, like I was saying earlier before I derail back to this, with smartphones, there's a lot of apps that don't have the same level of value that we see in a lot of AAA or even indie titles. I think, first off, before we get to that, big shout out to like all the independent developers out there who make deep, rich narratives. I find myself straying away from like the big box releases, the big AAA titles, because narratively or artistically, a lot of independent titles are more rewarding because the technology is there for them to produce a fully fledged game that is uh, rewarding for the developer to make and cost effective, depending on the size of the studio. But also, I find them to be more interesting overall. Is that you guys' experience?
I feel like my experience is some of these bigger box companies are putting out product that is not as well involved because there's a sense of there being too big to fail. And I do like that there is now this opportunity for the little guys to put in the work that once used to be put in to make games spectacular and give them a chance, give them a platform. I really like seeing that trend.
Yeah, and like a trend we're seeing on both the like the app side and also like the big AAA too big to fail companies is we're seeing a lot of frankly abusive practices on a number of levels from those companies. On the cell phone sides, I see a lot of apps that are literally just Skinner boxes. The Skinner box, if you're not familiar, is a methodology by which you reward a player at regular intervals for performing the same action over and over again without providing anything of actual value. There's a lot of theory into it, but basically what Skinner discovered in his research that was that when you reward someone for doing something over and over again, that if that reward is filling one of the primary needs, something like food, sleep, water, human interaction, that you can only get a person to engage with that repeated behavior so often. But if you're fulfilling a secondary need or want, the potential for the person to continue engaging is endless. That's why gambling compulsion is a thing, is because you're engaging in this same behavior and those machines are set up to pay out at certain intervals, and there's always that feeling of, this next one could be the big one, because there's a built-in chance to get a payout at certain intervals. And the same thing applies to Skinnerbox games, where you're performing a very similar set of actions that don't have a lot of value. The game's not providing you a lot of value, but it's providing you rewards in such a manner that it feels like there's value there. Where if you step back and actually looked at it, you're not actually getting anything out of the game at all. I think like the worst offenders are like the clickers. Like Cookie Clicker really started that, and those techniques are kind of being weaponized to serve ads to people in these games for those companies and to make revenue. On the more malicious end of it is things like microtransactions, which EA is actually getting potentially getting fined for that in Europe for basically targeting gambling at children through the just almost malicious microtransaction models. I'm not saying microtransactions by their nature are bad. I think they add some value to some games. But when you're just rewarding people at regular intervals for doing the same thing over and over, that doesn't add value to a game. So something I wanted to dive into and really get you guys' view on is, outside of like narrative, well, including narrative, what really adds value to a game?
I find that a game in some sense has to be challenging. It just simply
Agreed.
it needs to serve you some sort of challenge that is at least accessible, not beyond your means. But as soon as you are getting comfortable to that, to actually bump up the intensity, I find a good challenge to be something that is a redeeming quality in a game. It might just be me, but that's how I feel. I do play a lot of puzzle stuff, and that's I love that about it.
I fully agree with that, and I think that to provide the malicious version of that is, we see a lot of games, specifically free to play titles, where the difficulty keeps increasing, but to a point where you actually have to pay money to progress, or you have to wait a prohibitive amount of time to reach the point where you can progress, where it no longer becomes fun, and that it's a predatory model that gets people who are impulsive to buy into it.
Right.
Where a game that actually has value is building the scale of the difficulty up to keep you engaged and to keep you thinking about it, and it's not saying, pay this to bypass that. An actual game that's on a game console will not ask you to do that. I think we do need to define shovelware. So, like, shovelware is any game that is literally just pushed out onto a market for the sole intent of making money. The thing that you have to understand is most games, I'm not going to say anything, most games that you see on a store shelf yes, they're intended to make money, but there is a certain degree of artistic integrity that is expected of those titles. Uh,
Hmm.
for the most part, there are outliers, and you can very easily identify shovelware by very low production quality, uh, and just something will feel off about it. But a lot of downloaded games, especially again on phones, are specifically designed to either get ad views by keeping you continually engaged, or use cheap, unrewarding gameplay elements that can feel engaging until you really stop to think about it. There is a bit of a skill to defining it, and that's why if you're gonna buy a game, you do need to look at user reviews specifically. The internet being what it is, it can be hard. There are a lot of fake reviews, but like talk to people, and you'll get a good sense whether a game is worth engaging with or not. But shovelware, I think, falls into the same category as like a lot of the crapware we find on the app stores, where it's just a machine designed to keep you engaged with ads or to get you to pay into their ecosystem to continue getting any sense of engagement. But a good game will reward you in other ways.
Yep. I found I remember a very fun method to try to distinguish one from the other, and it was apparently obvious when I was growing up. And you would visit a store like Target, Walmart, any retailer like that, and you would see one side, like you would have those nice display cases with, like, a certain consoles, titles, and stuff like that,
Yep.
or something that was like, just like PC related stuff was all laid nice out and on the top row and such. And then you would have these boxes of games that all seemed about the same that were on the bottom and all the way at the very end. Things that were various versions of slots, various versions of like card
Card
games like
games, yeah.
poker and stuff like that. Lots of mahjong. That to me is a very basic definition of shovelware. It's something to just it was pushed out quickly to appeal to a certain type of audience, and I'm sure that the quality suffered, especially seeing the price tag on some of these things being like $8, $5, stuff like that,
For
and
sure,
it
for
would be
sure.
brand new in the box stuff sold at like Target.
Yeah,
It,
they're
it
often like quantity over quality, where it's like 50 in one,
50 and
The
one,
10,000
501.
games,
Right.
the reskinned arcade games.
I will say, in defense of those thousands and ones, my grandmother on my father's side picked up one of those, and I dug through that collection, and it was like a fun collection of prototypes in a lot of ways, but mostly it
oh for
was
sure.
garbage. But
Yep.
another good indicator that the game you're playing is not going to have much value is, especially if it's a free to play game, especially on a phone or a computer, if it has an energy system associated with it where you can only perform so many actions a day. That's but there's a secondary currency that lets you keep doing more stuff for less of that currency. That's a really good sign that it is targeting what in the industry are called whales, people who are willing to shell out a large amount of cash to look good on the internet, basically. And there's no good way to put that. Um, but back to value, like what are some other things that like you play a game and you see this kind of thing and it provides value to you?
I would say rewarding like a work ethic within the game. So before cash shops where you had your games being kept afloat by these whales who would sink in way too much money for some item that would give them an edge over what were dubbed tryhards, which are the people who would put in the time and the effort to earn the item in the game's legitimate environment without shelling out money. Before cash apps and all that, you could actually play a game on level footing, and if you did put in the effort, you were rewarded for it. You weren't bullied by people who had the ability to sink money into the game.
Yeah, like I think like the birth ground for a lot of these cash shop games was free alternative servers to certain MMOs that had to be kept afloat by some sort of model, and that was the model that was kind of cooked up. Is that hey, if you pay to support the server, you can get these extra items that have in-game benefits. And folks, if you see a game where you can get items that affect gameplay for cash, that's we have a name for that. It's called pay to win, and that's another surefire indicator of a game that is of low quality and low value, and those they are problematic and honestly should be avoided.
For the cash shop model, a game that can have a cash shop run appropriately is if the items are just cosmetic and they don't affect gameplay. Those don't negatively affect the game itself.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is I think the shining example of that is there are two examples that come to mind. Path of Exile, which is a action RPG, has a cash shop that is exclusively cosmetics. And if you want to pay to look a certain way in a game, as long as it doesn't affect the gameplay, that's fine because PoE has a reward for effort system. Again, like the Skinner box is reward for time, where a decent game is going to have reward for effort and is going to have various methods of exerting that effort within the game. Another good one that is, I wouldn't say it's as good, but it is fairly recent and in the minds of a lot of people, is Fall Guys. The only thing you can buy in that game is cosmetics. You still have to. Nothing affects gameplay in that game as far as anything you can buy, but it's a fun game that a lot of people enjoy, and I don't see any problems with it because it rewards you for effort and learning the levels and whatnot.
Right. Yeah.
Like there are ways to do things correctly and wrong, and the YouTube channel Extra Credit gives a lot more information on the Skinner box and ways to avoid the Skinner box. So if you search Extra Credits Skinner box on YouTube, you can get a lot more information if you're interested in those.
Yeah, I think there's another thing about certain games that keeps me coming back, and that is it having some sort of aura of positivity.
Oh
I
yeah.
think Fall Guys is one of those games that kind of hits that mark, especially in its game design. It's meant to me, provoke um, uh, just fun craziness. I don't know how to really describe that better, but it's mayhem but controlled,
Yeah. I mean, it's
and
like kind
just
of cartoony or like
yeah,
game showy. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, it was
yeah,
modeled off of
and
what is I can't think. Takeshi's Castle, I think, was the original one. If you're
Oh, like,
familiar with
Wipeout was like the American version, I think. Yeah.
yeah, MX Most Extreme Elimination Challenge was the American voice over a little bit problematically released on Spike
yeah,
TV.
Well, yeah.
like a parody kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
parody's a word, but I
yeah, I
digress.
guess so. No, but I do love that. Yeah, Fall Guys is one of them. I actually ended up learning a lot about a game that's a couple years old now, Overwatch, in terms of their reward systems that were implemented into that game as well. In terms of how they dealt with dealing out experience points. I had heard that they had problems trying to keep their servers filled, and they found a good way to keep people coming back, encouraging them to join a server even if like it was in the middle of a game, was to reward the fact that they helped to fill out the servers and actually keep things kind of full, and
Yeah,
giving them an experience bonus in that regard. And also for those who didn't necessarily just want to go online but practice some of the levels, try their hand against some AIs that were part of a certain character class. They would even reward you for things that were offline.
nice.
It was just really nice. And I know that that's a little bit of a dated example, but I had just heard about that because I hadn't played that one, and just hearing that kind of model was very nice. It was refreshing.
I haven't played Overwatch in a long time. I don't remember that model being present when last I played. Granted, it's been a while,
Yeah. I think
but
constantly added that. Yeah.
but I think Overwatch is a good chance to look into something else that is problematic. Most of the reason that EA and other large companies are facing litigation, a lot in the EU from consumer protection agencies, is the concept of loot boxes, uh, which is you either pay through your time spent in the game, your experience points or whatever gained, or by buying some sort of buying into some sort of virtual currency. You can get these boxes by which you can get loot, which is something that is either associated with gameplay or associated with cosmetics. But the fact of the matter is that they have to publish their chances to give certain rarities or qualities or whatever you want to call it of items. Let's be frank here. Let's call it what it is. It is gambling. It is buying into a system, a company's system, converting cash to a currency that can only be used in that game to get items in that game, and it's basically a scratch off card to get rewarded something, usually of not great value in the game. The chance to get something that is actually valuable or sought after in the game is so horrendously low. Um, and it is another one of those predatory practices that unfortunately a lot of companies are engaging in, and it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. I'm going to actually be avoiding a upcoming release because of a microtransaction model. Halo Infinite. I don't think you guys have heard about this. We a few of us have been playing the Halo games for a long time, but it has always been a thing in those games that you can kind of customize your character in terms of color and emblems on them. And you could choose your primary color, your secondary color, a tertiary color if applicable. But in Halo Infinite, the microtransaction shop is now going to have what are called shaders, which is color sets that can be applied to your armor. It can no longer be customized individually right out of the gate. That's something that you either have to buy into or you have to play the game for X amount of hours to accrue the secondary currency to acquire that items. And that's not something I choose to engage with. I understand that some people find the I can play enough to earn it, or if I play well enough to earn it, and I'm okay with that for some games. When you're breaking 20 years of tradition to do that, I'm personally am no longer willing to do that kind of business unless the game proves to be very good and of value otherwise. What are you guys' thoughts on those kinds of models, especially like if there's precedent?
For Halo, that is for a franchise like Halo, that is especially discouraging. I don't vibe with that kind of model either, especially when there's just nothing like there is either nothing to gain or just a absolute soul sucker in a grind. And if there's something I've realized that I don't like in a game anymore, it is having to grind out for something that is uh, really very little value.
Yeah, and now being older, I don't have the kind of time to sink into a game to earn these minuscule payoffs that usually you could, put a reasonable amount of effort in and get. And then you have the other option to pay a few bucks and unlock it, but by then you don't have that sense of accomplishment that you've earned this, and then you get bored of the game and you end up quitting it anyway.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. And I mean, I kind of understand like why companies do that now, especially like since people are so sensitive to like the initial price of a video game. Cause like I know for like how many years, like 20, 30 years, like most like AAA games have been like $60 tops. And then, they might have like additional maps or like, new like stories that you can buy like DLC, but it's not enough. So instead of like raising the game to like $70 or $80 initially, I mean I think like a lot of these companies, instead of raising the price initially, it's like, okay, well we got you now. If you want to update this, you need to pay a little bit more. Which I mean I understand it from like a business standpoint, but yeah, just for the consumer, I don't think it's good.
Yeah, and the communities have complained about that, and there have been various degrees of compromise. But the fact of the matter is, for a lot of games, especially in the AAA big company space, you don't get the same amount of value for your cash as you used to. You used to get a whole complete game, and like there are these games that have the games as a service model, which, if done right, can be very good. Having seasonal content roll out can be very interesting. A good example of doing that right is Animal Crossing on the Nintendo Switch, where you bought the game for 50, $60, depending on which method you got it, physical or digital. And they've had these gated releases for a certain time where you will get. We just had a Halloween event. There was a summer event that was released as a patch, and you keep getting these new elements added into the game after the initial purchase, and that's a value add. And I didn't have to pay for that. And I think that's a great thing. The downside to it is when you have the season pass content, which is labeled as DLC, but is really essential to staying with the community, especially in a multiplayer game, if you want to keep up. Destiny does that, and I understand people enjoy Destiny. I think it's a great game. I just don't feel like paying $20 every 6 months for the next bit of content. And to experience that, I already bought the game, and you supported me for 6 months. It's a model that can be done right. And then at other levels, you have optional engagement if you want to, but there are some that, again, can be predatory.
Another good example of the additional content being done right, Risk of Rain 2, where you bought the game once and you get additional updates where it's meaningful content that's added in, but you're not forced to pay an extra surcharge for it.
Risk of Rain 2 is a game that the four of us have definitely gotten a lot more than our money's worth out of. I kind of go for, if I'm paying X dollars for a game, if I can get that many hours of entertainment out of it, I think that's worth it. And Risk of Rain, I've definitely gotten a lot more hours than dollars I put into it. By a long shot. It is worth mentioning that up until August of this year, the game was in active development. We've all been in since the beginning of development in, I think, March of last year. We're recording this in November 2020. But they are still, post-release, continuing to support the game and give us additional content. Most of the updates until now were just part of content to make it fully complete. But, like, even if the game had just been what it was worth what we paid for it when we got it, and it has continued to improve, and they've been very good about taking community feedback. And that's a great example of early access done right. But they've stated also they're going to continue to release content for free, and especially when a game is a lot more successful than it was ever projected to be, and the developer rewards the community with post-release content. I think that's powerful. But seasonal content like we're getting with Animal Crossing, the models vary. The games as a service model of online games that have new content regularly released for them, I feel like they do so to... They have different methods of accomplishing that, some of which I think have value, some of which you have to be so invested to engage with those monetization models. Again, there are predatory monetization models, and if you're unsure about getting into a certain game, you should definitely talk to someone who has experience with it. Something I wanted to talk to in terms of value is games that have different ways of rewarding the player. I think this mostly applies to single player games, but when I'm playing a game and I go off on like something that is not essential to completing the main game. If I do something that is completely non-essential, and I get a couple lines of dialogue or a bit more insight into the world, that is a reward. That is not a reward in the sense that you get something you can use in the game, but like seeing the extra detail and the effort that the developers or artists put in is always really fun and cool, especially when they build systems that are fun to engage in and you are rewarded for engaging in, even if it's not essential. I think that has a lot of value because it says, hey, we put something here for you to find. The feeling of discovery, I think is one of the most valuable things you can put in a game nowadays, and it's something that I've always enjoyed. And why kind of the first time you play a game is uh, always the most important, because if the player feels if I as a player feel constricted and like I'm not allowed to test the boundaries and go discover things, it's not engaging me. But the feeling of discovery and player agency, there are ways to do that that are rewarding outside of items or narrative that I don't think even the developers design for a lot of times, but rewarding players with a view or just anything for exploring the space is always something that is good to see. Rewarding player agency is a good sign of a good game.
I completely agree. There's one side where you're doing side quests, and then there's just another one where you're exploring a level and sometimes finding Easter eggs.
Oh yeah,
I think that's oh yeah. I really think that that's something that um, I really enjoy about games is finding the little things that the little fun things that were put in there as sometimes little jokes or little references. There's not necessarily a huge amount of replay value whenever there's that, especially once you've discovered it, you know where it is. But still, it's a fun little nod to the people that have bought the game and the ones who are willing to put in that extra effort. It's a fun little reward. It's very adjacent to what you're talking about. But I love finding Easter eggs in games.
Yeah, feeding the human, like the human nature of wanting to explore and discover is never going to be something that is viewed in a negative context in games, and it's something that again, I'm going to go back to indie games. Indie games seem to be doing that better recently. We have all these open sandbox games that are coming out from AAA studios that try to pack in, hundreds and hundreds of hours of content. And I don't think you really need all that, so long as you are feeding the human nature to explore and discover things past a certain point. Like, yeah, it's great that there's a map that is literally like 1,000 square miles, but if there's nothing in that space, it's useless. Like, yeah, I might see a few things, but like if there's nothing to engage with in that wide expanse of space, it doesn't have nearly as much value
It's
as
just
if.
filler.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it comes down to taste. Here's a question I want to put out to you guys, because we all engage with different varieties of games. We have different genres we gravitate towards. In the games that you've played in the past 5 years, like if you had to pick one that you thought was impactful and just really well refined and polished and just something you enjoyed so much, what game is that, and what about it kind of gripped you in a way that says, this is a good game, this is something that has value that I think other people would enjoy? Like if you guys want to take a break and like think on that question, I'm all for it. We've been we're at an hour and 10 into this recording.
Cool.
So like if we want to take a break and like think on that.
Take 5.
Take 5?
Or 3.
Sweet.
Yeah, take 3 or 5.
2.
So yeah, a game in the past 5 years that like impacted you and what value you thought that had.
And do you mean like last 5 years that we've played? Or
that you've played in the last 5
out?
years, yes.
Okay, good. Because I don't think it was released in the last 5 years.
No, it was released
all
8 years ago.
Okay. The example that I would have is Borderlands 2. A nice improved version over the first Borderlands with a lot of the same concepts, but just taking what was there in that original game and multiplying it and making it that much more fun to explore, and especially much more fun to explore if you have a party of at least 2 or more.
In what ways?
In what ways is enemies would be scaled up, but everything else would be 2. Working as a team to try to complete objectives, and it combines something that like I had not played a game like that in a long time, and I was kind of late to the whole Borderlands game.
So, what value did that add? I guess is the question I'm asking. Like, in what way did it have value that made it stick out in your mind that much?
Personally, I just never have been the kind to get into RPGs like the rest of you have. And I feel like that one really, it was an accessible platform for me to be able to experience some of the things that you were talking about that are positive views about gaming, especially in like a context where you have a storyline and you have to deal with conflict and such. I didn't really have that because I really didn't feel like I got into RPGs, and this was an accessible platform for me.
Yeah, you had a
Yep.
blind spot in role playing games. I get you. I can see that definitely for Borderlands too.
I was gonna say, yeah, like in the last 5 years, me and Kyle kind of talked about it when you guys left, but Untitled Goose Game, because it was like for me like something I had never really played a game like that before, because there is like kind of a story because you're like progressing through this little town, and I think it's England. Yeah, you play as a goose. I mean, no dialogue. At least I think it's because you're the goose and you don't understand words. You just kind of hear like gibberish. And yeah, I don't, it's yeah, and I liked it because it was challenging, and you did have to like try different like direction, like yeah, different tactics each time, and like they keep ramping it up. Like you learned like a mechanic, and then like the next level would be like the same mechanics, but ramped up to where it's even more difficult.
So yeah, for context, Untitled Goose Game, like you're basically a goose that's being a
Yes, you're a
jerk and
goose.
trying to mess with people, and like the ways that you have to accomplish the tasks of being a jerk one goose. Like, can you give me some examples of some ways that changes? Because I have no context for Untitled Goose Game. I haven't played it.
All shenanigans all the time.
Oh yeah, and yeah, I guess if you want to get like deep about the story, it's like, well, you're a goose. I mean, is it really like is its motives evil? It doesn't know what it's doing, but
No.
yeah, but like yeah, you go through the game, like you start, and there's like a little like paper. It looks like a piece of paper with like different like almost like a shopping list. Like, take this guy's hat, go put this radio in a lake. Just like the most random things, and there's like one of my favorite things about that game is there's a button that just makes your goose honk. And besides, like it'll like surprise people, so they'll like drop stuff, and you like learn that. But also, it's just for me at least, spamming that button is like the funniest thing in the world.
If I could add, and at the beginning of the game, I didn't realize how much of a mechanic that would end up being. Like that honking just seemed like a funny little thing, like in racing games where you have like a car horn or something like that. That doesn't actually do
Right.
anything. But in this game, something that would have been just a funny little annoyance is actually a pretty valuable mechanic in the game. I had not seen that before. It's just
Yeah,
a
and
just
especially
a
when
fun
it
touch.
first came out, yeah, it was just like a single player game, and then I think they added co-op when it got released for the PC and for another system, I think.
I think it was Switch.
And yeah, yes, well, I think it was on Switch, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like that, yeah, it even made it even more fun because like somebody would be carrying something and one person would like honk to get their attention, and then you can go and like go behind them and take something. So I mean, I kind of played like kind of stealth action games like that before, but never in the context where it was like so, I guess, minimalistic. That's what I really liked about it. 'Cause there's no dialogue.
And also, like, it sounds like it gave you a lot of that sense of discovering, oh, I can do this, and then adding that to your
Yeah, like your bag of tricks. Yeah,
yeah, no,
yeah,
I can definitely see that. Sierra.
Okay, so I got two examples, some pretty impactful games, and we've actually been playing them for more than 5 years. First, Skyrim. Full disclosure, we've played since release,
Yep.
and it goes back to that sense of discovery where even if you're playing unmodded and you didn't add in additional things, there's always something new to find, and It has a lot of replay value. You can replay and play it totally different than the time you played before. You get different perspectives, even meeting the same characters in a different way. And even as a single player game, that's a pretty valuable asset to a game. And another example, which we have played since its alpha release, is Minecraft,
Yeah.
which, as a sandbox building game, the only limit is your own imagination. So you get to test your limits while testing limits of the game as well. I'm very good at breaking Minecraft.
Yes, you are. I think if I had to pick two games that I found a lot of value and joy in, I have two very different games, and for different reasons. Going to the sense of Discovery, the biggest one for Discovery for me was Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. You have a series that is historically confined to a few regions. You follow a storyline, you go through some dungeons, you have to learn new tools to overcome obstacles and ultimately, defeat the big bad of the game and save the land. That's kind of been the Zelda formula up until this point. But what they did with this one is they went back to kind of the roots of the first game. The first game, you were just dropped in. This is Hyrule. Stuff's bad. Go fix it. And you kind of had to explore and discover everything in a non-linear fashion. Breath of the Wild did that with the addition of being just a big open world that had so many nooks and crannies that you could dig into, and so many different ways of doing things due to the way that they changed how items work. You could pick up a stick and beat an enemy with that. That stick would eventually break. You could grab a shield and you could ride the shield down a hill. You could shield surf. Just so many different mechanics, different things you could do that once you discovered them changed the way you perceive the game. The landscape, the layout of the environment that was... I had never experienced that in a game before, where I was constantly finding new ways to explore and thus enhancing my experience of discovering new things. I put a lot of time into that game, and it was probably the single most fulfilling game experience from a discovery standpoint. The other game would be Stardew Valley, which was developed by one dude. Initially, he had some support from a publisher to get multiplayer and the like in, but Stardew Valley is a game in which you inherit a farm and you take up farm life in a very small town of, I think, 30 people. And it's not just the farming. You have to go out, you have to clean up the overgrown farm. You have to start planting things. You have to tend for the plants on a day-to-day basis. In-game time, which I think it's an hour every minute or something. But there's, beyond just the farming to get money, I mean, there's obviously the goal of make a good farm, but the main point of the game is developing relationships with other characters. Certain characters will have certain behavioral patterns and move in a certain way. And if you interact with them, or if you bring them something they like, you build up different relationships. You can have different scenes with them. You can date and get married to some of the characters, or some characters that you can potentially have relationships with. But others that you just learn their story. There are so many people, and they all have their individual stories, and those stories can go different places dependent on the choices you make. It's a very cute game that can be about it can be about farming, it can be about exploring some mines and finding some diamonds and stuff, but it can also be about the people. And it was one of the first games where I found the interactions between the NPCs and the player to have a lot of weight in the context of a very small community, and it was just a very different experience for me, and I really enjoyed that, and it impacted kind of the way I viewed narrative in gaming, and really kind of regained that appreciation for the value of narratives in games. I was aware of it before, but it made me aware of it again and reminded me why I play games as opposed to a lot of times like watching a show on TV. It's that engagement in all the different ways you can gain engagement that I think for us in the older age group, especially as adults, that's where we really find value is in things like narrative and rewarding gameplay and social interaction. Not just with, and I'm not talking about Stardew Valley anymore, but like in the ways that we can interact with each other through games. I think those are the real values to us now. You know, even overlooking the benefits for kids as discussed by the various studies.
Going back to Minecraft, something else really cool about it is we've played it since alpha, and now our kids are playing it, and we have the ability to play it together and kind of bridge that generational gap of, okay, this is what we grew up with, but now it's this, but we can still do something really cool together.
Yeah, wasn't that game released in 2009?
2009 was the alpha release, and it
Oh my
keeps changing
goodness.
so much. Like Minecraft is like I don't know how they pull it off. They've sold it's the most sold individual game of all time. They continue to release new updates, new features, new. The game is procedurally generated, meaning no two worlds are the same. But what can be on those worlds keeps getting added to, and it's a completely different game than we played 10 years ago. And to be able to play it and have that sense of familiarity while also discovering new things alongside our kids, it's powerful. It is something that games are something people can bond over. It's a point of common ground. And I think even growing up, that was like something that you can always default to, like especially like for us in school, is like if you didn't have common ground with anyone on anything else, you could almost invariably find a game that you and another person had played because of how many fewer games there were at the time. But now like there are the big games and there are the little games. The big ones are games that people can talk about as just a common point of interest. But also, like with all the independent titles and the thousands of games out there, like there's also space to bond over these small experiences that not a lot of people got into because it wasn't targeted at them. And there is a large social impact, positive social impact that I think games have had on society. Granted, there are problems. You have the breeding of toxic communities, but at the end of the day, I think video games are a net positive. And again, we're not trying to like change your views or impact your system of values. A person's value system is determined by their life experiences combined with their personality. And this is more to provide perspective on why folks of our age or really of any age put value into video games. While you might see someone wasting their time in front of an idiot box, we're actually more engaged than anybody watching a movie or a show because the argument of people get so involved that they think it's real life has been thoroughly debunked through a number of studies, and I will link some of those in the show notes. But the effect of video games causing violence has been debunked so many times it is almost comical. The reality is people can separate what's in the virtual space from what's in the real world, and it can be a very valuable tool not only for learning and learning to deal with emotions and to spark creativity in young minds, but to be a social bridge for the older minds and to be a means of conveying a narrative that is so much more involved than anything a movie can ever accomplish. I think that's really the value we can put on them at the end of the day. Is there anything that we feel like we haven't talked about in terms of
Um,
value or problems even?
no, I kind of want to go back to like Minecraft, like when you're playing it with your kids. Like, is it kind of like enlightening or like interesting to like see how what they get out of it, that as opposed to what you get out of it, and like learning from them and them learning from you?
But definitely, they have shown me so many things that I've never even thought of. They use different colored blocks and do giant pixel art in the middle of a field, and it's all super cool, and they've built fortresses in ways I never would have thought of, and it's amazing to see the improvements they make. And then they'll come in and they'll see stuff I've built, and then they'll copy it and they'll make that better, and it's really cool to see that.
Yeah, and it is to Jake, your point about kind of they teach us, we teach them. Like, we can provide perspective on some aspects of the game, especially in the survival mode where there's monsters and stuff. But like
Right.
also like
Yeah.
they will tell me things about like the new things that are getting put in the games because they play it on the Switch, so they just get the updates, and there's new things that they engage with and learn about, and maybe I haven't played in a while, and they can tell me about these things, and I can learn about it through them, and there is very much a back and forth in terms of information about the game and ways to be creative in the game. It's very rewarding as like a parent of an 8 and 9 year old to be able to have that level of engagement and common ground. It's a social, like, we talk about it being a social bridge for us, but in a lot of ways games can be a bridge between parents and their kids. And I think that's an advantage that parents of our age and our generation have to engage with their children that prior generations didn't have, because they didn't have that kind of technology. I mean, you would bond over shows or sports or whatnot. And it's just
Right. Yeah.
I feel like in some ways it's a more efficient engine of common ground between parents and kids, especially when you engage with a medium in different ways and you can gain those different perspectives back and forth. I think there's a lot of
It's a real
value in
personal
getting different.
connection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Like personal connections are some of the most important things we can have in life. Straight up.
Right. Yeah. Especially if you can see like your kids, expressing themselves through it too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've tied that up really nice. And like, seriously, if you're a person who still doesn't see the value in games after listening to this, I can't blame you, especially if you don't have the perspective. But keep in mind, there's a reason people put a value in video gaming. There are a lot of positive aspects, and even if you don't see the value in it, a lot of people do. And different people have different value systems, but you should really never disparage someone for having different values from your own, because their values are built from their life experience, and you should really never, poo on someone for having a different experience from yourself. Like I don't see the point in a lot of things like collecting cards, but people enjoy stuff like that, or like modding your car up to drive at racing speeds. I don't see a point in that, but people enjoy it, and I'm not going to look down upon that because I don't understand it. I'm going to be happy for them because they have different values and they enjoy what they enjoy.
Yep. Don't
It's
yuck
very
other
nice.
people's yums, I guess.
Don't yuck on the yums.
Don't
Yeah.
yuck on the yums. That's what the
Please,
kids are
please,
saying.
please don't
Please,
yuck on the gums.
please edit that out.
Nope, I'm saying it now. You've doomed
Yuck,
yourself to
yuck,
being
yuck.
the don't yuck on someone else's yum guy.
Yum. Yes.
Ugh.
Oh, that's what the kids are saying.
Oh.
Another thing we kind of glossed over. Now you can laugh all you want, but simulation games. There's some pretty wild ones out there.
Yeah.
But when it's like built in properly to a game, you can learn some real life skills from it. There's a lot of games that have like built-in economies that you can learn the aspects of that you can apply to real world scenarios.
Yeah, even if it's not one to
Like
one.
how to run a business. What?
Even if it's not like a 1-to-1 comparison, you can still get the general
No.
concepts.
Yeah, it's like economics light. But like you can learn it from a textbook, but it's more fun to be actively engaged in it. And if it's skinned to look like some fantasy scenario, it's more likely to stick. And then you can apply it elsewhere.
Yeah, some people learn through doing rather than from reading and classroom conjecture and the like. And Like another skill that I think can be learned from the simulation games, especially ones that have like a real time clock associated with them, is time management. A lot of people can struggle with the concept of time management, but then they will play a game and learn to balance that for the sake of the game and then realize, oh, I can apply this to real life. I've actually had a couple of I work in IT. I've had to be kind of a mentor for new techs sometimes, and some folks have struggled with time management, but I'll talk to them and find out they play a game, their time management is a thing. And I'll just tell them, think about it in that way. Use the experience you already have and apply it here, because sometimes you don't think to apply one point of experience to something that's a completely different ball game, but it's a very useful tool, and if you can learn to have versatile thinking like that, again, that's another way it can really help you in the real world.
Probably the greatest example of a game with time management that I can think of is the Persona games, where you have a set time that the game takes place, and you have to very carefully decide what you're going to do with your time, and how the game ends is based on how you spent your time. And the one time I got to play through, I failed miserably because I focused on the wrong thing.
Huh.
You can almost make the same case for Majora's Mask.
Oh, definitely. A game in which you have 3 days to keep the moon from falling on town, or you have to Groundhog's Day it to try again. Yeah, no, it's a very good example of having to learn the loops and when to apply what kind of effort where. It really is a big part of time management skills, especially like in a professional context. You have to prioritize not only when you're going to do something, but in what order you're going to accomplish the tasks associated with that thing.
I think you can also make a case for speed running or doing time trials as a method to refine your own personal efficiency. Making personal strides to do something more efficient and manage your time in a much more optimal way. And I know that you've done that before with many different games.
Yeah, like if you want to be efficient at something, taking the time to do it over and over again and learn the intricacies of whatever task that is can really help you to be more efficient in accomplishing that task. And especially if you can see how to mix elements of different tasks together in a way that is more efficient to accomplish all those tasks. Like if you know you have a waiting time in task A and you can use that to start certain things in task B and then meander your way into task C and back to A and bounce back and forth between that. It really can make your workflow A, more engaging, and B, accomplish just as much with less effort and in less time if done correctly. For sure. And I think the speedrunning mindset is definitely one of always striving for more efficient ways of doing things. I think anybody who engages in like just trying to learn the concepts of speedrunning can glean something useful for that for real world application. I think that's a good point to wrap up. Thank you guys so much for joining me in this discussion. This is something we've been wanting to talk about for a while, and I think we got a lot of useful and hopefully thought-provoking conversation. And if nothing else, if you're listening to this and you really don't have didn't have a perspective of why people might value gaming before, I hope you can see that now. And keep in mind, we're talking about video gaming in the traditional home console, like a Nintendo or an Xbox or a PlayStation. Definitely not the video gaming here signs you see on gas stations and what like that refer to gambling. That's not what we're talking about at all. But thank you, the three of you, so much for joining in this.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
Just kidding. No, it was awesome. It's fun to talk about.
And if you've got input, hit us up on Twitter.
Yeah, definitely get at us on Twitter on at We Might Be Nerds Pod. Shoot us an email, we might be nerdspod at gmail.com. Like, honestly, if you have any feedback about the show, we would really appreciate that. Like, if there's something we're doing wrong, tell us. We're always open to feedback and evolving the way we do the show, and
additional perspective.
Additional perspective is always appreciated, especially if we get something wrong. Straight up tell us. Just a quick note on that note about last episode. In the last episode with Dr. Mark, I did reference a study about VR headsets on cows. I just wanted to point out there, I haven't found anything debunking that, but again, keep in mind this is coming from Russia, whose reporting may be dubious. It was an official release from an official Russian ministry, but keep in mind that things could be reported just as a facade. So just a bit of awareness on that bit. But thank you for joining us again, and I hope you've gained some insight if you did not have that perspective before. As Sarah noted, we can always be found on Twitter at MightBeNerdsPod. Also, I will be posting the show notes for this episode and all previous episodes finally in a central location at WeMightBeNerds.com. At the time this recording goes up, we should have all of the show notes for previous episodes with links to reference materials up on that site, and that site also includes an RSS feed of all of our currently released episodes. Although this one might not be showing up there quite yet. It does take a day or two to kick in. But in any case, thank you so much for joining us.
Any recommendations? Any plugs?
Try the games we've mentioned.
Actually, I do have a couple. I do have one recommendation. Again, check out Extra Credits. Extra Credits is written by a game developer and actually a person who has struggled with gaming compulsion, which is something we didn't touch on enough. But I think that's something that's worth addressing fully in another episode, and really exploring what causes gaming compulsion and how to deal with it. So, but no, check out Extra Credits for even more information on what can give games values or what developers can do to give more value to their players. It's a very, very well published and edited channel that you should definitely check out. So that's Extra Credits on YouTube. But that's it for us this week. And if you like the show, if you enjoyed the show, we hope that you might share it with someone else. We haven't done any advertising of any kind, but if you, we promote the shows within some local circles. We have the Twitter, but if you're finding this show just on your podcatcher, check us out on Twitter. Could always use more followers. If you enjoy the show, we'd ask that you share it with someone else if you think might enjoy it. So until next time, I'm Dylan Critchfield.
I'm Kyle Montgomery.
Jake.
I don't remember my name. No, I'm in Jacob Montgomery.
I'm Sarah Critchfield. And if you enjoyed this episode, you might be a nerd.
All right, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.